When India and Pakistan clash, there is always a third player watching closely from the sidelines: China. While the world sees a two-nation conflict, the real game has been triangular, and for a long time now. From military support to strategic cover, Beijing has consistently backed Islamabad, sometimes quietly, sometimes overtly. This is the story of the India-China-Pakistan triangle and why the next war may not be fought on one front alone. It could be the nightmare scenario for which Indian military strategists have been planning for decades: a two-front war, with China and with Pakistan. During the 1965 India-Pakistan War, as Indian troops pushed back Pakistani forces in Kashmir, China issued aggressive warnings to India over the border disputes in Sikkim and in the northeast. Remember, just 3 years before that, China had won in the India-China War of 1962. So though China did not enter the 1965 war directly, Beijing's posture forced India to divert some resources to the Eastern Front. Effectively, what China managed to do was to get India to open up a two-front pressure scenario. This was more psychological warfare than actual warfare, but it ultimately worked to Pakistan's advantage. Despite that, the Indian army wreaked a catastrophic defeat on Pakistani forces. Eventually, it led to the Tashkent Agreement. In 1971, as India intervened to stop the genocide in East Pakistan and helped create Bangladesh, Pakistan counted on China's help. But in 71, geopolitics intervened. The United States and China were engaged in secret diplomacy at that time. Just a year after that, it was Richard Nixon who went to China for the very first time a US president visited Beijing. At that time, US President Richard Nixon had asked Chairman Mao Zedong of China to mobilize troops to threaten India on the northern front. Beijing did move some units to the northern border, but again, it did not intervene directly. It signaled support, but it stopped short of war. Instead, what happened was, it was the Russian Navy that sent a huge posé of ships which directly helped in the Indian naval blockade of Karachi, and that helped the Indian army, the Indian troops who stormed into Bangladesh and stormed into Dhaka to capture that country and dismember East and West Pakistan in a matter of less than 2 weeks. But the psychological leverage that China brought to bear was real, and it shaped India's military planning for decades to come. In 1999, the next war that India and Pakistan fought during the Kargil conflict, China took a more cautious approach. Publicly, it called for restraint from both sides, India and Pakistan, and privately, there were multiple conversations with the Pakistani leadership at that time by the Chinese leadership, asking them to pull back these Pakistani regulars as well as these terrorists who had infiltrated the icy heights of Kargil. At that time, India-China relations were slowly but surely showing signs of thaw. Beijing did not support, either directly or indirectly, Pakistan's intrusion into Indian territory. It also understood this could escalate dangerously. But at the same time, China never condemned Pakistan by name. Sometimes in diplomacy, silence can also send a strong message. In 2019, after the Pulwama terror attack killed 40 Indian soldiers, India struck back with an airstrike on a terrorist camp in Balakot in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. The world watched as the two nuclear-armed neighbors stood at the very edge of war. At the United Nations, India pushed for the global recognition of Masood Azhar, who's the Jaish-e-Mohammed chief, whose organization was behind the Pulwama attack. But China repeatedly blocked that move. It shielded Masood Azhar at the United Nations Security Council multiple times, calling for more evidence to show his linkages to what happened in Pulwama. Only after sustained pressure from both the United States and France did China finally relent, and Masood Azhar was blacklisted by the UN Sanctions Committee 1267. It showed how deeply Beijing shields the strategic assets of the Pakistan army. Today, China is deeply embedded in Pakistan through the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is part of the wider Belt and Road Initiative. More than $50 billion China has spent in investments in highways, some of which have been built on disputed territories. There are joint military exercises between the Chinese Navy and the Pakistani Navy. and the Chinese and Pakistani armies, all of this have locked both countries into a tight embrace. For China, Pakistan is simply a counterweight to India. For Pakistan, China is the ultimate insurance policy. It's not just about their all-weather friendship, this is actually a geopolitical axis. And that's not all. China has today equipped Pakistan with a range of advanced weaponry, including the JF-17 Thunder, which is a 4.5 generation fighter jet, the J-10C fighter jets, which is a 4th generation fighter, the HQ-9 air defense systems, similar to the S-400, which India has procured from Russia, the Babur-class frigates, the Hangor-class submarines, and the Al-Khalid T-4 tank. So basically, according to SIPRI, one of the renowned and well-respected military research institutes, about 60% of all Pakistani weaponry today is Chinese. These systems form the core of Pakistan's military strength. In any future conflict with India, and particularly so these days because war rhetoric is really sky high, the drums of war have been beating both in Pakistan as well as India after the Pahalgam attack, these Chinese-supplied weapons platforms will likely be deployed across air, land, and sea. It reinforces the depth of the China-Pakistan ironclad strategic partnership. So if India and Pakistan were to go to war, then China may not jump in with its troops, may not directly intervene in the war, but it is not going to be a neutral party either. It could activate tensions along the line of actual control to divide Indian forces, and this is an even sharper reality today after the 2020 Galwan clashes and the mobilization of Indian and Chinese troops along multiple friction points at the LAC. It might even ramp up arms supply to Pakistan, or even provide satellite imagery and intelligence. Beijing's strategy is simple. It is indirect pressure. It is to try and ensure that India remains boxed in within the confines of the subcontinent. This is what Indian military planners have called for a very long time the two-front war. Pakistan in the west, China in the east. For decades, China has played the long game. It has used Pakistan as a proxy to keep India distracted, divided, and ultimately to curtail India's rise. In every India-Pakistan crisis, Beijing's shadow looms large. It's not just about Kashmir or terrorism, it's about 21st century dominance in Asia. China believes there cannot be two Asian superpowers. So to understand what happens next in South Asia between India and Pakistan, whether there will be a war or not, don't look at New Delhi, don't look at Islamabad, just follow the power lines back to Beijing.